It's a very strange field. There are a lot of skeptics out there. It's fine to be skeptical, but you got to pay attention to the evidence. I mean, to the information that has been produced and come forward. You can't just be a skeptic and say, I don't believe it. You have to look at the information. So there's a normal resistance to these outlandish stories, but Pentagon and the whole government has had a very difficult relationship with this subject going back to World War II and right after, when the Cold War, when they were the government was denying these sightings that were widespread. Millions of people were seeing UFOs. So the Pentagon, it's a complicated story why the government had taken this position. It's changing now somewhat, but perhaps partly because they didn't want to panic the population. There was nothing they could do about these things. You can't shoot them down. You can't prove anything about them one way or the other. So they were very upsetting to people in power and to the American people. So the government took the position that they're going to, stigmatize the whole phenomenon and use every opportunity to ridicule people with sightings. But it's a good question. Why did they take this position? Because it was not like they were, giving away secret information. No one was asking the government to supply secret, flight characteristics, anything they had learned about the extraordinary capabilities of these objects. That is something that remains very mysterious. Maybe the government knows, surely the government knows a lot more than it's saying. But, I'm not saying the government should have put out all the information it had, but maybe not made fun of the people who were reporting these things. So that's what the climate was then, that the government had decided early on a policy of stigmatizing the phenomenon. Well, as I lay out in my book on John Mack, there was a whole series of government programs, investigations, secret, or not so secret, actually. Some of them were announced, where they were actually purporting to do investigations, went under different names. So one of the more famous programs was called Project Blue Book, where they studied the reports of these objects and reported on it in a public report. But the report came out at the end of 1969, and it said basically that there was nothing to see here, even though there were 701 cases that were officially designated as unresolved. In other words, there was no answer. A lot of the sightings can be explained. We know that. They are aircraft, they are satellites. After satellites started, after Sputnik in 1957, satellites went up into the atmosphere, so there were always satellites flying around. There's atmospheric conditions, clouds, lights from Earth that are reflected back into the sky. There's a lot of things that are explainable, weather balloons. So the government took all these explainable incidents and said, well, we can explain all these things. Well, actually, they couldn't, because there were 701 cases when Blue Book finished at the end of 69. That was still unexplained. That's a lot of unexplained cases. So when they eliminate all the things that it could have been, birds, aircraft lights, and so they were left with a lot of cases that they couldn't explain. Plus the sightings, when you look at the accounts of what people say, they're very clear. People say, I saw a huge craft with windows and it came within, a couple hundred feet of me. And people are very explicit. So it didn't look like they were mistaken. They weren't looking at planes or birds. Anyway, so that was Blue Book, and before and afterwards there were other, and Blue Book actually was the end of the government investigations until ATIP. So you had from the end of 1969 to 2017 a period when the government was not officially investigating UFOs, although it was all along. I mean, records that have come out of the Pentagon show that the government never lost its interest in UFOs. There was always secret research going on. So, but officially, it ended with Blue Book until ATIP.